the 40-year reunion of the Southern Courier, Montgomery-based newspaper, flaunting the news of the up and rising African-American community. Who do we have here? All of the people who participated in that next emancipation. Not after slavery, but after the vote. These are white people who committed themselves from the heart to come into an indigenous community. Oh yeah, this is not just an international term. It was a community where white people did not have any kind of contact with us. And you made a decision to put aside the prejudice perhaps of your mother and daddy, sisters and brothers, and get on the freedom train and come and make a difference.
The idea for the Courier really came from Alan Lake and Peter Cummings, who were two students who were at Harvard on the Harvard Crimson and who had been in Mississippi in the summer of 1964.
We thought about combining our journalism experience and training at the Crimson with the passion and the commitment that we had developed that summer before the summer of '64. And the idea of the Courier was born.
It's been said that journalism is the first draft of history and that history belongs to those who write it. Without the Courier, there was a stream of human events going on in that period of the South that simply would not constitute history. It's true in journalism and in life. What you focus on is what it's all about, and the Courier's focus for that 175 occasions really defined, created, and perhaps on 175 occasions minutely changed history.
And I remember I came down here, I think I came down during the primary season, the first, in 1966, which was the first election that, measurable numbers of black people could vote. And I just said, this is it. This was the best job I ever had. It was the most fun I ever had. And it really changed my life.
I came because I wanted to be part of what seemed to me the most extraordinary social movement of my time. And I also came for kind of the lesser reasons that I thought it would be, and it was, the most extraordinary reporting job I think possible. In a sense, one of the reasons why I didn't go back to journalism, I sometimes think it's because I thought nothing could ever be better than this experience. The opportunity to sort of share the lives of people who are really doing something to change the world.
I think that I had gone into it believing in journalism and that journalism can make a difference. At a moment in time, I think it was something that was important. It was important, I think, to me to believe in it, that you could maintain the highest standards of journalism, the fairness, the balance, the accuracy, at the same time that you felt absolutely personally passionate about the movement, about the people and the episodes you were covering, that you could still do it with the kind of standards that would make us all proud as journalists.
To me, it was all encapsulated by a little encounter I had with a young kid, couldn't have been 6 or 7, over in Selma when I went to the projects to work on a story. And this kid ran up to me and said, "You a demonstrator?" And I thought for a minute. What I wanted to say was, no, I'm a professional journalist and I'm trying to compile an objective newspaper that's going to reach both sides of the civil rights movement, and it's going to get the reporters in the South reporting on the stories that they're missing. But I just looked back at him and said, yeah, I'm a demonstrator.
The affect I take away from the Courier is how simple it is to make a newspaper. When I think of a lot of places in this country, how badly a newspaper is needed. It's such a simple thing to do, and just to go in and put together a crew who talk to both sides, get both sides' stories, write a straight piece, have it well edited, and put it in circulation and put it in people's hands is an incredible thing.
I can remember growing up as a kid, advertiser, they had what was called the Negro page, or the Negro column. The column would be about this size of this column right here, and on one page of all Negro news in Montgomery.
The gentleman referred, I think, sort of charitably to the Negro page. That's not what they called it on the mainstream newspapers that had that page. They use another N-word to describe it, and the way we know that is that one typesetter inadvertently left the slug line in one day, and the paper printed with the N page at the top of that page, spawning a bit of a demonstration, but also revealing just what the attitude was on the mainstream press.
And so when I had a chance to see a paper that was not just devoted to just Montgomery, but about for black people, it made me feel good. I sort of came full circle with the Southern Courier. I started out as a carrier. I saw the Southern Courier as sort of a way that the black people had a voice in the community and got some of the news out. So it made me feel good to be a part of the Southern Courier, to be able to get the newspaper out into the community. And then, again, when I said I came full circle, I think it was you, Michael, who came to me one day and said, "Do you want to be a reporter?" A reporter for the newspaper. I thought, sure. It was my senior year in high school, and I had one true experience with this. I think I told Michael about it. But that experience gave me a chance to see some of the things that were happening, not only just in the civil rights in Montgomery, but also experience it for myself to see what some people went through to cover news.
I'm Gloria Bradley, formerly the photography lab technician for the Southern Courier, under the direction of Mr. James Jim Peppler. I joined the Southern Courier about a month before graduating from high school in 1966. I had a photography course at George Washington Carver High School on Fairview Avenue. And that afforded me the opportunity to have a job with the Southern Courier about a month before graduating from high school. And I'm grateful for having been employed with the Southern Courier until it closed. I was functioning in the lab, and I knew the Southern Courier newspaper was getting the word out to the people, whereas maybe the regular news, standard newspaper may not have been. I noticed how much news we did get out, and what an impact it would have had getting the word to the masses, where the other newspapers may not have been doing that.
When they first came south, I was actually in the 12th grade and had typing skills and training. Worked in the office, private lessons. And they needed a typist coming from Atlanta for the newspaper. And I was working for the NAACP in the position that Rosa Parks had served as secretary. And then the Courier came along. So September of 1965, I started working for the Courier and worked for the Courier until we became defunct, December of 1968. And what an experience.
Viola Bradford was just amazing. One of the local people who came to work for us when she was still in high school. And she was the best writer, the most naturally gifted writer I've ever known. She could cover anything and make it make sense. Everybody related to the things she wrote. We did find a printer in Montgomery. There was a guy named Paul Woolley who was a wonderful guy. And it was still pretty much an all-white operation at the print shop. And those guys used to stand around reading the paper, reading Viola's stuff, the stuff she wrote, and talking about it.
Myrtis Rubin, who was one of my favorite Courier people, she was very young too, I think probably 19 or so. She lived in Mendenhall, Mississippi, which is a very small town in Mississippi. I don't know how she found her way to the Courier, but she used to cover a lot of Mississippi politics, and nobody knew more about Mississippi politics than Myrtis Rubin. I mean, she had the inside scoop on everything.
I was in Tuscaloosa in West Alabama from the fall of '65 into the spring of '66, and in Greene County, as in a lot of the other Black Belt counties, that was a seismic time for voter registration, and the two local movement leaders were a guy named Thomas E. Gilmore and a Reverend Branch, William Branch. And I found Gilmore, and I called him this week. He's now a pastor, a full-time pastor at a church near Birmingham. And I introduced myself. I said, there's no reason why you should remember me, Reverend Gilmore, but my name is Jim Willse, and 40 years ago I was with the Southern Courier, and I wrote about you. And he said, the Southern Courier, our newspaper.
And it kind of all came together in a guy named John Hewlett from Lowndes County. He was one of the first people we met in Lowndes County. I'm sure I remember Mr. Hewlett sold the paper for us for a long time. We used to send it to him. And even when he started forming the Lowndes County Freedom of Organization, and even when he started working with SNCC and the Black Panther Party, I know his picture was in the Courier a number of times. The stories about him were a number of times. And I mean, I guess you could call it Black Power, but his goal was to register voters in probably the toughest, scariest county in Alabama, and he did it very well. After we left, he wound up as the High Sheriff of Lowndes County for a long time, and really the man to see in Lowndes County if you wanted to get anything done. And so it all kind of came together in somebody like that. I mean, that was about integration, that was about Black Power, that was about telling the truth to power. It was, he was an amazing man. He did a lot of remarkable things.
A turning point for me in the Courier's life was in January of '66 when Stokely Carmichael called us from Selma, and he was then challenging SCLC and Dr. King with regard to he had a shout of Black Power that was just beginning just about that time. SCLC was regarded as the integrationist wing of the movement, and SNCC was regarded as the more assertive Black empowerment part of the movement. And he summoned us over there, and he said, look, you're running all these stories about Black people getting their heads bashed in, trying to integrate into the white world. Every Courier article is about Blacks trying to get into the white world. And I learned a lot about racism from what he said then, and the tone of the Courier changed for me that day when he said the Black movement is going to be different. At least this part of it is going to be different, and we're going to stress self-empowerment and the fact that Black people can achieve on their own without being part of the white world. And besides that, white world ain't so great anyway. Some members were offended by what he had to say, but it made an effect on me. He taught me a lot about racism, and I think the paper, at least while I was around, changed quite a bit because of that.
And really, I thought it was a good paper right to the end, and it kind of evolved a little bit. I mean, it wasn't so much the heroes from the North, it was a lot more local involvement, and a lot of really good people working for the paper, and kind of what we had in mind when we started. It was a paper, you know, of the people, for the people, and it was getting to be a paper by the people.
So we tried to get into these communities, meet people, and try to make them, encourage them to take over this paper, become an important part of that paper. But one of the things that we found was that there was a danger level. Not that we had fear. I think probably none of us felt personal physical fear, but we were aware prudently of what could happen.
When the first issue of the paper came out, we all celebrated by gathering together and going to a Ku Klux Klan rally. Up on the stage, this guy in a robe pulls out from under his robe this issue of the Courier and starts saying, this has just come out and we've got to hunt out these people and find out who's doing this.
I love the back roads of southern Alabama and to drive them. And once on a story, after talking to a sheriff or a policeman, there were some good old boys, and they came around and they said, you were over yesterday in such and such. And they cited chapter and verse where I'd been yesterday and the day before and almost where I was going. And that's how I became aware of the White Citizens Network of CB radios and intelligence that track, a lot of civil rights workers and a lot of us. But there's really no time to be scared. Who could be scared when people were dying and really were putting their lives on the line?
I was scared all the time, with no good reason. If somebody in a pickup truck was following me closely, maybe he was just angry that I was driving too slow, but I was sure he was after me. And I've covered 6 wars since I left the Courier, and I'd never been as scared then as I was here. And part of the reason I think is I didn't come down here looking like a civil rights worker. So I was able to listen to the good old boys and get really scared.
I know the questions that have been asked, were you scared? And of course I was, quite scared. I got connected with SNCC, and I was on the fringe of being a little radical. And so my sense when I got involved with the Courier, it was more paranoia. You know, these white guys and ladies that have come from the North, Ken, do you really trust them?
A group of rich Harvard kids coming to the South, all white, which is true of the group of us who came down from the Crimson, who somehow think that they are going to, in this patronizing way, make a difference in the South, leave. And by the way, why aren't they changing the white community? What are they doing when they're doing it in the black community?
But that was one thing that bothered me the most, you all, is I could see visible signs of love and caring and whites wanting to seek out freedom and equality and justice and to be colorblind. But here I am living in Montgomery with people who are killing and shooting and, you know, calling you nigger.
I remember going to Lowndes County with Jim, and bless him, he made me feel at ease because I was scared to death. You know, here I am in Lowndes County, and you have to live in that era to understand what was going on. You could be killed.
This was my night of darkness, and it occurred in Lowndes County. The night of the day that the Black Panther Party had been on the ballot. And we were all gathered at a little church, I think it was. Stokely and the SNCC people and the John Hewlett and all the movement people were there. And somebody came in and the message had come in that a man had been shot dead in Fort Deposit.
Stokely and I and all of us began to carry guns. The Battle of Fort Deposit was based on the very fact that we were hoping the Klan would attack. We had planned for a shootout. We wanted the Klan to attack and go in after us because we were going to take them out.
Within moments, every man in the room had a shotgun. Stokely went wild and got a gun. And a pickup truck was just filled with men with guns that I don't know where the guns came from, but obviously people who lived in Lowndes County didn't get too far from their guns. And they rolled off down the road. Something made me feel I could die that night. And there was something empowering about making the decision that I'm going to do this because I feel my place is to be there. And if I die or live, I made the choice and I've accepted it. And I drove on in.
When it occurred to me that it was the 10th anniversary of the bus boycott, I just picked up the phone and called Martin Luther King in Atlanta and said, would you write a piece for us on the 10th anniversary? And he said yes. But the week went by and our deadline was approaching. I think whatever it was a Tuesday night we put it together. And Tuesday morning arrived a Western Union telegram, which was then the equivalent of email. And it was from Martin Luther King Jr. with a wonderful, beautiful article on what the boycott not only meant to Montgomery, but to American history. He quoted Thucydides in the very first paragraph, which most editors probably would edit out, but he could translate all of that into lay terms and reach the common person, and it was just a wonderful article. I called Rosa Parks about the same time during that fall. She truly did not think anything she did was extraordinary or part of history. She couldn't understand why I was asking, and she didn't want to do it. And I kept asking and I really had to persuade her that people in Montgomery cared about her memory after 10 years. And I said, could I write it up from what I know, and I would ghostwrite it and get your approval, and that's the arrangement we had. And in the end, I read it to her over the telephone, and she said, that's fine, and you can put my byline on it. It was an extraordinary time for me.
The big issue in Tuskegee that summer was the integration of the churches. And it was just, I mean, I actually was in a way scared, but I was mostly scared partly personally because every Sunday we all got attacked and we had cameras broken, and it was just really, it was sort of raw violence in a way that I'd seen some in Mississippi the summer before, but this was just relentless. And the students were so incredibly persistent and courageous, and at a certain level I thought foolhardy to take on the white churches with the sort of tenacity that they did every Sunday. And Sammy Young was the leader of it, and the final story I did, as I recall, was on sort of this movement to integrate the churches, and then shortly after I left he was assassinated. But it was, you know, I sort of had a question all summer long of, did they really have to, did this movement in Tuskegee really have to take on sort of the most difficult part of the struggle, which was the churches, and yet, in a way, the most logical part, but the violence that we experienced every Sunday was, you know, was just really quite shocking.
I also covered a very big trial in which the person who killed Sammy Young in January 1966, this was a student who was there or had just graduated, I think actually, who had been leading demonstrations, among them to white churches. And he was killed. He was killed by a gas station operator. And there were demonstrations all over Tuskegee. They painted a yellow stripe on the back of the Confederate statue, and there were guns, mostly kept out of sight, on the side of the demonstrators as well as of the police, but no one else got shot.
We took that campus over. I helped paint the statue black, trying to provoke the Klan for a fight. We wanted a fight.
When the man who had shot Sammy Young was tried, I covered that trial. There was no formal transcript taken, so that my notes became the basis for any further writings about that trial, my notes and my coverage in the paper.
Not many white people had crossed the threshold into this black funeral home in Birmingham, not in 1967, but here we were, investigating what we believed to be a murder. The proprietor knew why we were here. We needed to ascertain the location of the bullet that killed James Small, son of a black political activist. The day before, I had read a 1-inch report buried in the back pages of the Birmingham News. A black man had been spotted running near a school where, in the past, break-ins had been reported. The police yelled stop and then fired a warning shot into the air. Later, they found his body. That was how the Birmingham News reported it. The proprietor pulled down the sheet so we could see that the bullet had not entered his chest. He tipped James over on his side, and we could see that the bullet had entered his back. The warning shot, the one that had allegedly been fired into the air. I had seen a corpse for the first time, and it was the corpse of a young person whose death made no sense. A few evenings later, I went to a meeting of the Alabama Christian Movement at a Black Baptist church. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, head of the city chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was there. He said, "Every time you turn around, some Negro's being killed by some trigger-happy policeman in Birmingham."
But there are a lot of other murders we reported on. Some were just trigger-happy cops, scared or dumb or careless with black people's lives, but others were premeditated murder. A police officer from Prattville shot a black man in the back after, according to the man's dying statement, telling him he was free to go. And the policeman said, oh, he was trying to escape. Now, the reason the police officer would have had a good motive for premeditated murder is the black man had just shot and killed, a prominent white landowner, because that landowner was shooting into his house. Now, and what ensued, just for the sake of those of you who don't know, were lots of demonstrations. The white people in town would demonstrate in Ku Klux Klan robes and then walk into the little town hall to disrobe because they were the establishment. The black people had many other kinds of demonstrations that culminated in a really horrific night where they were in a house which had been shot into a few times by the brother of the policeman who killed the man. If someone in a white car had been shooting in, so the next time a white car came back, the civil rights workers in the house shot back and managed to shoot a policeman, injured him only slightly. So all hell broke loose, and eventually there was a standoff, and eventually the police went into the house and beat the crap out of a lot of people I knew, nearly blinding the head of the local civil rights movement.
My first story for the Courier, when I came down from Boston and flew, of course, through Atlanta, Mike asked me to go out to the little town of Crawfordville, Georgia, which was then getting some attention in the national news because they'd been under a court order to desegregate the schools. And during the summer, when the school system was supposed to be preparing for desegregation, what they in fact did was quietly enroll all of the white kids in schools outside of Tallahassee County. And they would provide buses every day to the white kids with police lined up, because what would happen in the form of a demonstration was that the black kids would make a run for the bus and be tackled by the white policemen so that they could not get on the bus to go to what then would have been integrated schools. And on the day that I came into town, there was a rally that was being held that night in the black church, and Dr. King was actually going to come in from Atlanta to address the rally. And he did so on a very, very dark night in very tense circumstances, and gave a very moving speech to a crowd that was both angry and afraid of what was going on. And there was a large crowd of whites outside gathering menacingly, but because King was in town and to protect him, there was a state trooper presence there, and under the moonlight, a phalanx of state troopers kept the white toughs, a couple hundred of them from across the street, from getting to the church. And at the end of his speech, King was really hustled out of the church through a side door. They got him into a car, leaving behind Andy Young, Reverend Andy Young, who stayed with the parishioners, and partly to kind of quiet both sides as the parishioners walked out of the church. Andy had a prayer session, and at one point he said something like, "Father, teach us to be nonviolent in the face of violence, and pray for our white brothers and sisters, because we cannot be free unless we're all free." And from the white crowd came the yell, "You'll never be free, nigger."
I once wrote an obituary about a tree. And, okay, I think it was Greenville, Alabama. It was a chinaberry tree, and the young people used to meet under the chinaberry tree. That was the code for a civil rights get-together. That's the only way they could do it. We're going to meet under the chinaberry tree. It not only provided a shade in a very godforsaken place, but this was their code, and they would meet there regularly to plan their demonstrations and what they were going to do. And one time, in the full view of the police, somebody chopped down the damn tree and carted it away. And this had a devastating effect on the young people in the community. And we ran a picture of the stump, and that's the obituary of the tree that explains to me how nasty racism can be. The only intent of that was to discourage people, to dehumanize them, to put them in disarray, and also to send the message who's in charge in that community.
I went down in May of 65, and I left in May of 68 because I covered the funeral of Martin Luther King. And just didn't feel like I wanted to keep on doing. I couldn't feel like I could carry my weight with the Courier without knowing that he was alive.
When you look at the papers, and I was pleased to see that one of the things I thought I remembered about the Southern Courier was not just the big stories that you covered, the demonstrations and the trials and and a sort of big earthquake events, but the little things. And I think that was one of the goals that we brought into the adventure, was to try and write about the sort of stuff of life stories that would not make their way into the mainstream white press. You know, you think back about the big events, the ones that had a lot of thunder and lightning to them, but that was, I felt at the time, and looking back, I guess I still feel kind of an important thing to do.
One of the conversations that I remember us having as we thought about the newspaper was about format. One of the decisions that we made was that this should have lots of pictures. That pictures could tell a story in a way that words couldn't. Jim Peppler, who's here, and Ken Lumpkin are among those who became photographers and who brought to life so much that's enduring about the paper, a decision that was made at that time about what the paper should be like.
I have to say that the golden, uplifting, underpinning excitement and joy of my life with the Courier was the music. I got to experience in a live performance music in places like Tom's Place and the Lake Coast Club, and I couldn't get enough of it. It was because the music, like photography, it talks to and comes from places that are deeper than just words. It gets right into you. And if you put pictures and music and words together, you've got a package that can come close to communicating truth.
They would love the paper with the pictures, and I'm glad that came up, because it gave me the opportunity to put people in the paper that normally everyday folks wouldn't see. And I think that's what made the Courier here in Montgomery at the time so important. It was people, ordinary people, people that didn't have the opportunity to fame and glory. They got the opportunity to be seen, and it made them feel good. It made me feel tremendously good to be a part of it.
People in their home have old papers that you have over there, and look upon those papers as almost their family Bible. Pleased with the very fact you've written about them, and I'm very happy today to be old enough and still alive enough to tell you thank you.
We were only here like 3.5 years, and it was, a big time out of our lives and big time in our lives that most of us, all of us, will never forget. But things got tough. We ran out of money. I couldn't think of, I and the people who were still around couldn't think of any way to keep it going.
The Southern Courier was something that I could feel proud of in my life, that I had the will and the energy to do it. And then it opened up a world to me. I always was incredibly grateful for the way in which so many of the people I met in the South would share their lives, the intimate details of their lives, without being afraid that they were going to be disrespected. They came to trust the Courier.
I've had some things that happen real bad in my life, but I've always been able to reach back and bring the memories and put the Courier and make it work for me. I was homeless and had a drug problem. But the Courier was there, the thought of it, and it gave me a sense of determination.
I thought that Tuskegee, Alabama was all of that and then some, because black folks lived there. And because of the work of the citizens there, they were able to make strides. When Lucius Amerson was elected the first black sheriff in the United States since Reconstruction, we covered that article. And imagine me moving to Tuskegee in 1975, and I could go up to the sheriff and say, I know you. I'd never met him, but because of the articles in the Courier, I knew all about him. It set the tone coming from Montgomery, you all. having worked in the newspaper and actually typing the articles, seeing the pictures, we were civil rights movement people. Because of my work on the Southern Courier, it connected me to the civil and human rights movement, not just in the South, but I met all of these folks who have worked so through the years.
And I look back, and I've said this to people, and I mean it. The time I spent at the Southern Courier was the best job I ever had. It was all real. You were there. There was nothing filtering it. And that summer, I guess, ratified a feeling that I had, or thought I had, which was that journalism could be a great adventure, and it could be, in its way, a way to change, to fix something that needed fixing.
But don't you feel in this country, since the civil rights movement, there's just this suppression of idealism in America. This great, generous nation that does such good work at home and overseas. There's been no channel for this idealism. I just feel the country is just so bottled up, so ready to heal itself and do a lot for the world. I don't know how that's going to break loose, but this paper is really kind of a beacon in that respect.
We have to bring value back to the way we feel about people. I think we have lost that. Then we really cared about making a difference for people. I just don't think people have that passion, the love for one another. And the media have to be the institution to make the difference. The word and the message have to get out here. And we need a new breed of journalists like we had back then. And until we have that, we're going to see a new destruction of a whole generation of people. Thank you.
The commitment, the courage, the skill, the integrity that they brought to the craft of journalism was a model then for what journalism should be, and stands as a model, I think, today. And if you really read some of these back issues, you will see that there were some great reporters who, as very young people, really did an excellent job of reporting on a rich tapestry of events that no one else was committing to writing.
I look back and I look at the Southern Courier as being raw journalism. I think all of us, to some degree, we didn't know it all, and we learned, but I think the results is great that this is a part of history that will go on long after we are gone. And I'm just glad I've been a part of it.